Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first ever Just Your Average Fishos live streaming show via our very own Facebook page. Hope you've all been able to join us this evening for what is going to be Just Your Average Fishos talking about fishing. Obviously, COVID-19, bit of a lockdown, the boat's packed away, it's a bit frustrating. I don't know if you agree with it or if you don't, but we're not talking about that crap tonight, so we want to talk about fishing. We're also going to talk to one of my close friends and also a Just Your Average Fishos fishing contributor, Anthony, who has years and years of mechanical experience, to talk about some of the things that you can do on your boat to get it ready for staying out of the water for a little while, and to make sure that when you finally get to take it down to the water, that you're not going to have a trailer, a motor, or a boat that overall fails on you. Before we get started, I thought that I might just do a bit of a shout out and some appreciation thanks to some very important people behind the scenes, namely, in no particular order, Luke Gavalis, who was the original founding member of Just Your Average Fishos about 5 or 6 years ago, who said, hey, I want to see some good quality fishing reports online that went into some detail and talked about techniques, because I'm sure many of you, like me, follow all of the various fishing report forums on Facebook, and they're all wonderful. They've got a lot of great people and great fishos on them, but haven't they recently turned into the post where you see a fish held above the shoulders on a boat that says, today, Westernport? Well, what good is that? So what we have is Just Your Average Fishos. And the moral to our page is that it's just a bunch of average guys talking about how we go about our fishing and whether we catch, or sometimes we also talk about how we didn't and what we might try next time. That gives you in-depth information that hopefully you can pick up one or two things and learn along the way. The information is free, it's unbiased, it's not sponsored, even though we look like a bit of a brand knob tonight. We're not paid in any way, so we can say what we like about what we want, and that gives you the most candid, up-to-date information that we have. We openly admit that there is a lot better fishos out there than us. So if you're wanting a full A to Z production of what, how fishing can be done and what you can do to catch more fish, there's some really great programs out there that you can join. A close friend of mine, Blythe and Chris Casso, run one called Salt Guide. It's a good operation. By all means, join that. And you can also watch Just Your Average Fishos and pick up something from there. So tonight, we've got some fantastic people on board. And just before I finish up the thanks, none of this would have occurred this evening without a close Mitcham Angling Club friend and a businessman from a business called We Are Technical, Ben Shannon, who's the producer behind the scenes. His business is just amazing, and he helps large companies run massive events and event management and productions, and he's helping them get online and stream. So he's actually the backing to our platform. So thanks very much, Ben. If Telstra is our friend, then we can keep delivering via the Facebook medium tonight. So let's kick it off. The boat needs to be packed away. We need to do what the government says and not fish. And boats, are best when they're used, both motor, boat and trailer, when they're driven around and they're used on a consistent basis, because that old arch nemesis, saltwater, is an absolute pain in the butt. So Just Your Average Fisho contributor, mechanic extraordinaire, best mate, Anthony Saric, welcome to the show, mate. And let's kick off with some of your wonderful information about how people can look after their boats and what sort of preventative maintenance they can do. I know that I've been driving down to the boat ramp on many different occasions and seen some poor sucker with a wheel or a tyre off his boat or something else broken like a leaf spring. So why don't we start with the trailer area and talk through your maintenance experience about what people should look out for and what preventative maintenance they might be able to do at home themselves.
How you going, guys? Yeah, let's talk basic products to start with that I use. So basically, the stuff I use at home is fish oil, inox, marine grease. There's a clear cleaner and just a basic grease gun. So from that, we can basically use those products on our basic maintenance. So we might as well start at the trailer plug. This one's a simple one. Basically, just unscrew it, spray it with inox. It just helps prevent corrosion and get rid of any moisture that's there. And when it's in lockdown, it can just do its thing and keep on penetrating.
One of the things I've noticed about those square trailer plugs, Anth, is that I once had an indicator that didn't work because the pins were pretty squished together. So any tips on how often you should pry them apart or how far you should pry them apart at all?
Quickest way to do it is just drive it. It's hard. Half a mil apart should be enough, just so that they've got tension when they go into the female plug.
Cool. All right, so why don't we talk about some of the other trailer areas that give us fishos, or can give us fishos, a load of grief?
No worries. Hitch. So mechanical hitch, basically these things do require greasing. Most people neglect them and don't grease them. They are a moving part and definitely need to be greased. Basically grease gun, marine grease, and just pump it until it just comes out the end at the front, and the same at the rear. Once you see the grease coming out, done.
Okay, and do you turn it at all to get it all the way around? And would you also, I've seen some older traditionalists, particularly the older fishing variety, that might actually grease up in the cup of the ball cup. Do you recommend that at all?
You can grease the cup. It's personal choice. Some like to, some don't. Personally, I do. It just helps reduce wear on the ball and the cup. The only thing with it is you do end up with grease marks on your pants if you do happen to knock the ball or the coupling when you walk past it.
Cool.
Shackles. With these guys, I generally just put a very fine amount of grease on the threads just to stop them seizing up. Alternatively, you can just inox them if you don't want to put grease on the threads, but that applies to any shackle, whether it's the one attaching to the car, whether it's a shackle holding the safety chain on the boat, etc.
Okay, and you're consistently referring to inox. Why is that a lubricant of choice versus, say, something like WD-40?
I prefer inox. It's not a petroleum based. It doesn't gel. It's just an all round superior lubricant for marine use, in my opinion. CRC, RP7, WD-40 all congeals over time, so that can have issues with chewing into wiring and making it go soft and rubbery and whatnot.
Cool.
Alrighty, winches and latches. Most winches generally don't fail. Well, they don't fail from seizing, but just a quick spray with a bit of inox to stop any corrosion on there will definitely help. And latches, whether it's an L&R, boat catch, bar crusher catch, etc. Anything that's moving, just a quick spray of inox just to make sure that everything's free and moving. And it also helps to disperse a little bit of water.
Cool.
Tyres. Alrighty. So on the side of your tyre, you've got a recommended pressure. Now, when a boat's sitting in a stationary spot for a period of time, I recommend inflating to the highest pressure that your tyre will take. Helps to reduce the amount of flat spot the tyre will get from sitting in one spot with a load on it. Alternatively, if you can't get it up to that pressure, what you can do is put a chalk mark at 6 o'clock on the tyre, and then once a week, once a fortnight at a pinch, just move the boat forwards or backwards a little bit, just so that you are moving that mark 90 degrees so that you are applying the pressure on the tyre in a different spot.
So if, say, someone's had their boat stored for a really long time and they've left it at either a lower pressure or a lower recommended pressure on some placarded trailers, that could be the reason why they're feeling vibrations through their bum in the car going down the freeway at 100 k's an hour, I suppose.
Yeah, very much so. That flat spotting, if you're lucky, a trip down the freeway, hopefully 5 to 10 minutes into it, that vibration should go once the tyre gets some heat into it. And the internal belts and reinforcement go back into some sort of shape. Unfortunately, if they've been sitting for a stays and generally results in a tyre that delaminates, unfortunately.
Okay. So what do we got up next? Looking at the pictures and the frames, we look at wheels. Wheel
nuts. Yeah. Alrighty. So this is one area that I see consistently that is a troublesome thing for a lot of boaties. The picture on the left is a standard open-end wheel nut. What generally happens with these open-end style nuts is the salt water gets into the thread of the stud and the nut. You have a flat tire on the side of the road, you'll go to undo the wheel nut and it will basically bind up from corrosion, and you'll have no option but to use brute strength and basically snap the stud in order to get the wheel off. Now, if you are lucky enough that you haven't had any of the nuts seized, I strongly recommend buying some acorn nuts or captive nuts like in the right-hand picture, and replace your open style wheel nuts with the captive ones to prevent salt water getting into the threads. Leaf springs. So I really don't go overboard on leaf springs. I basically get a can of fish oil. Ideally, you want them dry, so you're out of the water for a week or two. And basically, quick wire brush. Brush off what small excess rust and whatnot you got off. Coat of fish oil, done. Follow the instructions and 100%.
So this provides the leaf spring a load of added protection from the salt, because the salt sits in between the springs. Obviously, when springs deteriorate, their brackets can either separate, you snap off a spring. So is that the intention of the fish oil, to just really omit salt water?
Yeah, correct. So most of your the majority of your springs on your trailers are galvanized. Unfortunately, with the rubbing action of springs when they're working, that gal coating does wear away. So the fish oil just allows for an extra barrier to help with areas where the gal's worn off.
Okay, cool. So probably one of the biggest areas I'd imagine that you as a mechanical person would see, and we have all seen down the ramps on the freeways, is trailer bearings. And I don't think people can, there's so much talk on forums about trailer bearings. Check your bearings, buy quality bearings, not necessarily, cheap bearings that you might find at just some no-name trailer shop. Talk us through bearings, because that could really end you in the book, right?
Yeah, exactly right. So the quickest method that you can do to check wheel bearings without pulling them down is to just jack the axle up and spin the wheel. Any rumbling, grinding noises, etc., is generally the sign of a bearing on the way out. The inner bearing is the one that, in the majority of cases, fails in marine applications because it's the one closest to the seal. The rolling test is by far the better one to do, other than stripping it down completely.
So what would be the rolling test, mate?
The rolling test is basically just jack it up underneath the axle, get the tire off the ground, and basically spin the tire in a anti-clockwise direction, which is the direction of travel, and basically have a listen for any noise that doesn't sound normal. It should be a quiet. You shouldn't hear anything out of it.
So, really though, the only best way that you can check a bearing's condition is to strip it down. And a lot of people say, if you're using your boat heaps and putting it into saltwater lots, then you should do it 6 monthly. Some others say it's 12 monthly. I'd imagine this could be determined by the amount of distance that you have to travel to the ramp. So, for example, I've been very lucky with past boats. on trailer bearings not overly deteriorating. So I'm generally 45, 50 minutes to the ramp. So any salt water or moisture that can get in there can really dry out and warm up to and from the ramp. But if someone like yourself lives very close to a ramp, there's no opportunity for that happening. So what's your thoughts on really stripping down bearings and check them, and how often and so forth?
Personally, I check my bearings every 6 months. It's just easy for me, obviously. But the majority of boat owners, 12 monthly is a must. Every 12 months, strip them down. If there's any sign of wear, tear, or any seal deterioration, then you would 100% not even bother repacking these days for the price of a new set of wheel bearings. New set of wheel bearings, good quality ones, new seals, new grease, put it back together, tension them up, done.
Cool. And I suppose what people probably don't realise in their annual boat services, that often that only is just a jack up and a rolling test. It's not actually a strip down and proper check. So would you recommend that people that are taking their boats in for services, that they pay that extra $100, $150 labour to really get them pulled down and repacked, even if they don't need replacing?
Yeah, in the boat trailers that I look after, I will jack up and do a spin test, but I always recommend to pay a little bit extra and strip them down and redo them 100%. It's just not worth it. Like for the few dollars you spend getting them done properly, it can save you 5, 6, 7 hours on the side of the road because you've had a bearing fail and you've destroyed an axle.
Yeah. And I suppose bearings, you know, I've changed my bearings recently myself with some instruction from you. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube, but if you don't seat them correctly and you don't pack them correctly, you can really limit the life and they can become buggered straight away. So, you know, for the small cost that it is to get it done, like I don't mind working on stuff myself like you, but to the average Joe Blow that might not have the tools and the mechanism to be able to do it, it's not overly expensive, is it, to get them checked out?
No, they're not too bad to get done. But generally, the bearings that I've seen fail that people have done at home on themselves are generally failed from one of two reasons. A, they don't have enough grease in them, and B, they've been completely over-tensioned.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's have a look at the next picture and see what else we're talking about. Motors here. Okay, so a lot of people very rarely pull off the hood of the motor, and I imagine that storing a two-stroke versus a four-stroke is very different between the two motors. You want to talk us through a bit about that?
Basically, storage is realistically very similar. Both, regardless of whether two-stroke or four-stroke, they're not designed to sit around. So at least once a fortnight, I'd recommend just pulling it out from wherever it is and starting it up and letting it idle till it gets up to a reasonable temperature. You'll struggle to get them up to operating temperature, but just keeping lubrication up to them, keeping everything moving, it just helps to help just those things sitting around doing nothing. And run your carbs out of fuel. I'd strongly recommend that you leave fuel in them. The stories that used to come around with the fuel being left in them and turning into contamination is very much a wives' tale. The majority of contamination comes out of the fuel tank anyway. So
cool. Okay, and just before we move on, I suppose it's not often that someone has almost like a virtual live stream with a mechanic as professional as yourself. So just reminding people that they can ask questions online. And one that's actually come through the back function of the page is some boat mechanics recommend that when you pull off the hood of the motor, that you give it a fair decent spray with some sort of water penetrative lubricant. You know, this one specifically said WD-40, which I know that you and I aren't necessarily friends with. What's your thoughts on how often that should be done, and how hard should you spray? Like, what's okay to spray or what's not okay to spray?
Yeah, okay. So realistically, I use Enox as outlined already. Now, I spray my motor basically once a month. And when I say spray the motor, it is a light coating. You don't want it dripping off stuff. You just want a light coating. Enox does not affect electrical in anyway, and it just helps to disperse salt water. It doesn't matter how good the motor is. Unfortunately, salt water is going to find its way in somewhere. So, yeah, basically top to tail with WD-40 over everything. Linkages, electrical, the whole lot.
So trim rams, steering,
Yeah.
like if you've got hydraulic or cable steering and things like that. I'm sure we've got a photo of that coming up, or if we don't, yep, there we go. So,
yeah, so
you want to talk through that?
Yeah, same applies here. So anything steering related, I basically spray with Enox as well. Trim rams, motors, pumps, etc., all Enox. If you do happen to give it a little bit too much, a microfiber cloth or a bit of paper towel just to wipe up the excess. Enox is one of those things that comes off fairly easily, so it's not like if you put too much on, it's going to build up and stay there.
Cool. So moving on, what are some of the other areas that we're looking at? Okay, so fuel. This is a big breakdown area. Talk us through fuel and fuel management.
So the majority of issues in outboards, especially fuel-related issues, basically come from the fuel tank. Whether that's underfloor fuel tanks or separate fuel tanks like here. Unfortunately, you can't control what comes out the bowser. You can't control it. So basically what I say to people is if you have a fuel tank, like in the example here, that's removable, if you're going to hibernate your boat, I strongly suggest taking your smaller fuel tanks out and put them in a garage. Smaller fuel tanks that sit in boats are susceptible to atmospheric conditions, so frost and moisture and all that sort of stuff. And unfortunately, they are very open to the elements. So the number one thing to try and reduce the amount of moisture in your fuel tanks is to remove them when you're not using them.
And that's obviously specific to someone who has a tinny or a rubber ducky or a boat with a removable fuel tank. Obviously a bit difficult to sort of like a boat that's behind me, which is holding near on 200 litres underfloor.
Yeah.
What's your recommendation there? Because if fuel's going to sit, a lot of people believe that they need to add additives to the fuel. I've certainly done it myself before. What are your thoughts on how long does fuel last within a tank, and should you have the tank full and things like that?
All right, so people with underfloor fuel tanks, they've got the bonus that the fuel tank is actually covered by something as well. So it's generally in amongst stringers, foam, flooring and all that. So it doesn't cop the elements that an external fuel tank does. Fuel basically has a life of somewhere around 3 months before it really starts deteriorating. Whether you keep it half full, 3/4 full or full, it's debatable on whether it makes that much difference. But in terms of stabilizers and that sort of thing, like Yamaha make one, Suzuki, I don't know. I'm not a big additives fan in boats. I'm more of a keep your fuel filters clean, keep your fuel filters clean, regularly checked, and you shouldn't have that much of a problem.
Cool. So note to self: always use good fuel. Keep it topped up, essentially, and try and avoid water wherever possible. Inspect fuel lines and fuel filters. And I know certainly in my boat, it didn't originally come with a viewing inspection on the bottom of the filter, so I upgraded to have that put on, so you can just check it from time to time.
Yeah, very, very wise move. That viewing filter is definitely a plus to have. One thing I will mention, the guys that have the removable fuel tanks, they're generally between 10 and 25 litres. Every 6 months, I would strongly recommend that you actually have a good look in the bottom of your fuel tank and see if you can't see anything floating in the bottom of the fuel tank. The picture that was just up of the fuel tanks had a sample that I took out of a boat not that long ago. And yeah, there it is there on the right. And those two beakers, the fuel's on the top, the water's on the bottom, and that was two separate 25-litre tanks.
Okay, so it's looking pretty nasty there, isn't it? So that gets sucked up by the engine. And if it's a two-stroke, you really risk a lean run and grenading a cylinder then, don't you?
Yeah, correct. So the drama with any contaminants in fuel is it's generally heavier than fuel, so it will always go to the lowest point, whether that's the bottom carby of a two-stroke or whether it finds its way into a injector. It has the same effect. Actually, it has the same effect. So
cool. We've just had a question come through to everyone. Should someone top up with a higher octane before restarting at a later date? I certainly like that idea. It's been recommended to me. What's your thoughts, Ant?
Yeah, 100%. If you've been off the water for however long we are at the moment, say another 2-3 months, first trip out, I would definitely top up with at least 95 octane. That way it gives your fuel a little bit of a boost.
Okay. One interesting thing though, and this is another question that's come behind the scenes through to us just now, is how important is it to either run, should you not run 95 in two strokes and only 91? Because sometimes more premium fuel can clog carbies and things like that if they sit around.
Yeah, interesting question. Ethanol is definitely a no-no in two strokes. A lot of people will also say that 98 is not worth running in two strokes. My personal opinion is either 91 or 95 in two strokes, but as per anything, you always have to follow manufacturers' recommendations. But the majority of two-stroke manufacturers, and they're not many anymore, will tell you that ethanol is definitely a no-no. Some of the newer four-strokes are definitely ethanol compatible.
Okay, and for four strokes, I know that we're running the Yamahas. They like 95 or 98, and they tend to like the more premium fuel, despite what some boat shops might recommend.
Yeah, correct. The beauty with a lot of new four strokes is they run very complex engine management systems, and they can basically detect what octane is in the fuel tank based on the NOx sensor return. All engines are calibrated for a minimum octane rating, whether it's 91, 95, etc. They can compensate backwards, they can compensate forwards, but when they compensate backwards, so if you've got an engine that's recommended at 95, you're running 91, what they will do is they will actually compensate for the poor octane rating by pulling ignition timing out of them, which then reduces the overall performance of your boat.
Okay, so really in four strokes, try and stick to that minimum octane rating, which is obviously in your manufacturer's manual anyway.
Yeah, correct.
Cool. All right, so I think where are we now? Batteries. I've done a few posts on batteries before in terms of charging and battery maintenance, because it's a massive overlooked area. And these days, you know, if you have some of them, you see some of the big offshore boats with the massive electronic fit outs that they have, they could be drawing, 20, 25 amps, surely. So talk to us about some batteries.
The majority of batteries these days have a life. Yep, good.
Yep.
The majority of batteries have a lifespan of somewhere around 3 to 4 years. They're exposed to some fairly harsh conditions, unfortunately, in boats in terms of vibration and whatnot. Battery terminals and corrosion are probably the biggest problem that we see in boats. Every 12 months, you should definitely pull every electrical connector off the battery, clean it with some emery paper, Scotch-Brite, until it's got all the corrosion off it, then put it all back together. I don't use any battery maintenance spray on my batteries. I only use Enox. I don't like battery maintenance spray because it has a habit of leaching into connectors that aren't seated 100%, or they've got little corrosion marks, and can actually work as an insulator.
Okay, cool. So avoid that battery terminal spray at all costs. I've heard that before. We've just had a late question come through. older four strokes, run 91 or higher quality fuel. So this might be some of your really early Suzuki or Johnson, Evinrude four strokes, maybe some older Honda ones, 2002 sort of age. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, right. My general rule with octane in boats is if you have to run 91 for a cost reason, run it. But for the little bit extra, 95 is definitely beneficial. Like a higher octane rating fuel gives a better burn. There are very few early four strokes that didn't run an ox sensor. And again, you have to go back to your manufacturer's handbook because Australia rates octane in fuel different to the US. So the majority of forums that you see, the US will say 89 octane. 89 octane equivalent in Australia is somewhere around 92, 93.
Okay, cool. All right, so we were talking about batteries and making sure battery terminals are clean and stuff like that. What about charging?
All right, so charging is definitely one thing that's very overlooked. Very overlooked in a boat. Now, on the picture here, we've got two. Personally, myself, I've got a Bosch charger. It's a smart charger. I can basically plug it in. I can turn it on. It will do its thing. It will maintain the battery for me. So in terms of charging, I can just turn it on, set and forget. Now, a lot of people don't obviously have a budget to afford a $200, $300, $400 battery charger. So a lot of people have a old school linear battery charger laying around that just does a set 4, 6, 8 amps. What you can do in the second picture here is get a plug-in timer from Bunnings. You can pick them up for about $15. And the trick here is that you can set it to come on a Thursday at midday and turn off at 5 p.m. So every week it gets a 4 or 5 hour charge, so that when you're basically ready to jump in your boat either Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, you know the battery's fully charged and ready to go.
Cool. Okay, that's a really good tip. So if you've got the linear charger, grab a timer, set it up almost like you're watering your garden, and off you go.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic. Cool. All right. Any other areas that we're covering on the boat overall? I'm not too sure if that's... anchor winches. Yeah. Here we go. So, mine was making some noise until you told me what to do.
Yeah, look, electric winches, they're generally in places where people tend to overlook them and forget about them. Unfortunately, they're like every moving part in a boat. They do need a little bit of maintenance. Inox, spray them down. And make sure you concentrate on the gearbox. Most manufacturers run an alloy housing on the gearboxes. Unfortunately, they run stainless drums, stainless screws, and the problem with that is dissimilar metals don't like each other. So inox can help reduce the amount of corrosion, and it also helps disperse water while it's just sitting there not doing a lot.
Okay, so just before we jump off the anchor winch, mine was making a bit of a noise going up and down. So certainly inox the shaft.
Depending on what style you have. Some of the early winches have a little grease gun that you can put a little bit of grease into, but inox on the shaft everywhere won't hurt it.
Okay, cool. And we've just had a battery question. Sorry to revert back to batteries, Anth, but what style of battery is best for marine applications? AGM, lead acid, or another type? And I suppose that comes down to whether you have a multiple setup or a house versus starting battery. You just want to quickly talk through the different types there.
Yeah, it's an interesting subject. Personally, myself, I've got 2 gel batteries in mine. Century make good batteries. It depends on how much your boat requires realistically. So some people run a deep cycle battery and a lead acid battery, depending on the combination. I've got 2 of the same, but the majority of people tend to be on the cautious side of spending money on batteries, and lead acid is by far the cheaper of the alternative. The further you go up the further you go up from lead acid, the more you're going to pay.
Do you get more life out of them if you're going up from lead acid? And is it okay to use those for starting battery sand?
Yeah, look, the ones that are in my boat, I've had in there since I got the boat in 2015. They're still going strong. And yes, I've got an AGM and I use it as a start battery. Don't have any problems with it.
Sure, no worries. All right, so let's talk about clears, because I'm a bit of a detailing nut on my boat, and I hate clears that people can't see through. And
Yep.
Our illustrious producer has a boat that you would say is a commercial fishing boat, and I am going to get around to his house when we don't have to self-distance and clean his clears. Tell us a little bit about looking after stainless and clears, mate.
Alrighty, so with clears, basically, I just use a very warm water and a microfiber cloth to wipe down any excess that's on the clears. Once they've dried off, I will use a clear spray on them. There's Viewplex, there's a few different variations on it, but basically same as what the can says: spray on, use microfiber cloth, work it in, second microfiber cloth to polish it off. And depending on what product you're using, some bead really well, some anti-static, but that covers your clears pretty well. Press studs, basically on clears, I take them off. I use a toothbrush to get rid of any little stainless powder that's in them. And what I do is I use an earbud with inox on it, and on the female side, I will run that around the inside of the press stud, so that it's got some form of lubrication and to help it seizing and expel salt water. With stainless, basically quick wipe over with a warm microfiber cloth. And then in the bag, what I do is that microfiber cloth is covered in inox. So I basically use that microfiber cloth and wipe it over the stainless just to give it a protective barrier. Because unfortunately, as we all know, stainless is a few different varieties, and a lot of people use 304 instead of 316.
Yeah, cool. No worries. All right. So I suppose that there's some really good hints and tips on how to look after your boat, particularly the trailer and the bearings a bit better. So if you're hibernating your boat, try and pull it out, run it every week or every couple of weeks. Yes, topping up a higher octane fuel before you next head out. Pumping up the tyres to max inflation or rotating them weekly or every second week. Making sure that everything's greased and fish oil on the springs after you've brushed off the rust. All right, Anthony, that's been fantastic. I'm sure someone would have got 1 or 2 points out of that, if not more, if they're new to boating. Now let's get into the next part of the live Just Your Average Fishos show. I'd like to introduce a very close friend of mine and gun Westernport Fishos, Justin Blythe. You share such a wonderful name, mate. You have been a special invitee to the Mitcham Angling Club before, talking all things gummy sharks, and tonight we're talking to you about fishing for whiting in Westernport Bay. So, g'day, Justin. How are you, mate? And thanks for joining us this evening.
How you going, guys? Yeah, pretty well. Obviously struggling not fishing. That's to start with. But, yeah, obviously the whiting were going well before we stopped. But, a little bit about myself. Obviously, I haven't done a great deal of fishing for whiting, but when I do go for whiting, obviously I plan my trips and we do quite well. But apart from that, I've only been probably fishing for the last 5 or 6 years. Had back surgery and stuff like that, and
well done. No, look, I really enjoy following you on the Justin Blythe Fishing Guides page and your own page. You've always got fantastic photos at night of various gummy shark, snapper, and whiting. Talking whiting, I like using a Shimano 2 to 4 kilo Revolution. It's not the most craziest rod of all. You can pick these up in the store for about, I don't know, $115, $130, something like that. And it's got a Shimano CI4 2,500 to some new Shimano, I don't know, P1, P1.5 grade to 15 pound litre. before you go out fishing, and we're going to talk about, you know, what you do when you decide to go whiting fishing, and let's talk about all the tips that people need to understand. But your weapon of choice, tell us about your rod.
I've got a reaction 7 foot. It's a very fast action. It's 3 to 6 pound. It's a samurai rod. Otherwise, I've got a couple of cheapies, which are obviously the kids' rods, which I take as well as backup. But you don't need an expensive rod to catch whiting. You just need something with obviously a pretty fast reaction time, as in for that bite. So,
okay, and you'd recommend braid over mono personally?
I do in Westernport, tidal and stuff like that. You do get a better reaction from the braid, as in for that bite. So in saying that, I do run a shock leader off it, so the shock leader isn't that big. But you can do it straight to braid.
Cool. So Juzzy wants to go fishing for whiting, and you're going to pack up the boat and go. What sort of conditions are you looking for in Westernport to have, you know, to in your mind to be suited ideally for fishing for whiting?
Yeah, or probably mid to obviously higher, as in a stronger tide flow. Then lower tide flows, obviously, you don't get a lot of flow in the tides. So your bite period's a lot smaller. So if there was a change of tide in between, anywhere from that 1.5 to 2 metre tide would be a good tide for whiting. Areas as such, and like I do a lot of my whiting fishing just out the front of Hastings because it's close. The boat ramp's 2 minutes away. I'm out from home. I'm out there in probably 20 minutes. So, yeah.
Okay, so middle spit sort of area. What sort of depth range are you fishing, and is there any sort of particular ground in Westernport or ledges that you're looking for? How do you sound around? And I suppose we've got obviously a broad audience here this evening, those that will be new to fishing and boating, those who are very, very experienced. How do you position your boat and sound around, and what are you actually looking for, depths and things like that?
If you are fishing, say, the middle spit, obviously you're looking for middle spit itself, as in the bank, say on a high tide, and you're looking for that area from probably 2 metres to 6 metres on a high tide if you were fishing the run out. Weed areas, broken ground, sand patches.
Yep. Any particular day, night, moon phase or anything like that you think prefer to go?
Moon phase and stuff like that does play a big part in it. Like the full moon phase with the whiting do go quite well, but I wouldn't put it down to the moon phase. It's still the tide.
Yep.
So that flowing tide.
Yep. And so obviously Westernport can be quite tidal, and there's always a spot in Westernport where you can fish, hopefully win with tide. How important is that, and particularly with the handling of the boat?
More so to the point when you are fishing, and ideally you want wind with tide. So the boat's hanging the same way as the tide. So the fish are at the back of the boat. It's a lot easier to fish. If you've got wind against tide or wind half onto the tide, obviously boat will swing around a bit. So then you're casting on one side of the boat, or obviously out to the side of the boat. So then you've got two fishing on one side of the boat. So ideally, you can straighten the boat up by putting a sea anchor out, as long as you've got that tide flow, and you can obviously you can hook it onto the front of the anchor, then back and bridle it back to the back of the boat, so it straightens the back of the boat up. So
let's just say you are going to have more of a lighter north wind for Westernport. What area would you head on, say, a north wind versus a southerly, and what tide and so forth? Yeah,
so a northerly would be a run-out tide out the front of Hastings, wind with tide. If you had a southerly, it would be the opposite. You'd be fishing the incoming tide.
Yep. And do you recommend a particular tide one over the other for whiting in your own experience?
I do like the run-out tide, obviously on middle spit, and like run-in tide too. I'd end up down towards Tortoise Head and off the edge of Tortoise Head, off the bank into the deep, even off reel there.
Okay. Now, you're quite well known for catching some stonker gummies land-based. I think it would be fair to say that you're known to be more of a land-based fisherman than a boat-based fisherman until early snapper season, when you were producing some quality snapper every single night. Yeah. Whiting fishing land-based, can it be done in the Westernport area?
Yeah, of course it can. Like gummy fishing and stuff like that, like everyone knows I fish Summers, Balnarring, Point Leo down that way for my gummies, depending on what tides are doing. Before last light, you will catch some good whiting off that beach, in between, obviously, the edge of the sand, which is your gutter, and the edge of the weed there. I haven't tried from a lot, but when I have had a lot of rod in before gummy fishing before last light, you will get some good whiting down there.
Okay. Now, obviously, matching the hatch is really important, and different bays often suit different baits. What's your go-to bait? Do you have a bait combination? Do you want to collect bait, frozen baits, fish market bait? And how are you presenting it? Sort of what hook do you prefer, and how do you get it on there?
Well, hook-wise and stuff like that, I'd probably gammers I use, which is a C10U hook, which I find quite good, as in for even the bait presentation. Pippy goes on first, and then a long strip of squid. That way, if they take the pippy, the squid's still dangling, and you've still got a chance of getting the fish.
Okay, cool. And they're quite a small hook. So what's your thoughts about using like a worm or a traditional long shank style hook?
Yeah, long shanks I have used before. Depending on what sort of long shank you're using. With the finer profile, obviously you do get a good hook up. But I'm always, when I'm whiting fishing, I'm always holding that rod. You'll end up having a sore wrist by the end of it by holding the rod. But that's just as soon as you feel that bite, you're striking. So, yeah.
Okay. And so you like baits. So strip baits, what sort of baits? If you had, Justin Blythe's 101 recommendation for Westernport bait, what would you go for?
Anything from a candle would be probably an ideal bait that you would leave out there. And I mean like a fair strip of candle, like, not small baits.
Okay.
As in from my ideal bait for a bigger fish or a bigger whiting. But if I was just going to catch whiting, obviously pippy and squid, anything even from a pilchard strip, as in a fine pilchard strip, a slimy strip to, a fresh bait.
Okay, and obviously the C10U's a pretty small hook. Would you use those in a size 6 or 8 or a 4?
Size 6 is probably the main one I use in those.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, no worries. And so land-based, what are some areas that you might be half lucky to get a whiting with land-based Westernport?
Westernport, probably Balnarring, in between Balnarring and even Summers there, just along that, even down where Balnarring Yacht Club is, in between there and, say, Summers.
Okay. Would you run a running sinker rig or a paternoster? What's your sort of preference?
I'd still run a running sinker rig, which I do in the boat as well. But same again, like if you are whiting fishing, you want to have contact with that rod. So it's not about putting the bait on and putting in a rod holder and waiting for a bite or missing the bite. So if you are trying to whiting fish off the beach, you are holding your rod as well.
Okay, cool. All right. So any other recommendations? Like if I said to you, what are the few key recommendations that you would say if someone wants to go tackle whiting in Westernport? What would be a few of your key points that you'd say are absolute necessities to be able to do that effectively?
Yeah, so one's planning a trip, making sure you've got the wind right as well. When we're tied would be ideal. Bites around first light, last light are pretty good for whiting. And that depth. So if you're fishing a run out tide, you're looking for the edge of that bank once they push off the bank. So anywhere from that 2 to 6 metres. If it was the opposite tide as a run in tide, you'd be starting deeper, probably in that 8 metre sort of period. And then as the tide obviously comes up, pushing in closer. So as the fish get pushed up onto that bank. So I'd say on a high tide, on a low tide, if you're fishing that run in tide, you're fishing that deeper water, which is, I'd say 8 to 6 metres. And as the tide gets up, obviously over the bank, say middle spit and stuff like that, then you probably push into 4 to 2 metres.
Okay, now Westernport, like Port Phillip Bay, if you've got ideal conditions, can get fairly congested on the whiting grounds.
Yep.
What's your thoughts around anchoring up near other boats versus anchoring away from other boats? This is definitely a very touchy subject. I know if I'm gummy fishing and someone comes and anchors on me, it raises the blood pressure a little bit, but, because there's a whole ocean out there. But obviously in whiting areas, in particular sand holes, that the known ones are known. What are your thoughts around being closer to other boats versus prefer to be further away?
I'd prefer to be like by myself, even if there was a group of 10, 15 boats and I know they're fishing for whiting, I'd probably steer clear and try to find my own fish. That's me in general. But you can't stop people from coming over and fishing near you. As long as they keep their distance, I'm not really phased with it. There's enough fish. But if they're not keeping their distance, obviously it does make it harder because they're going to scare the fish to start with. And that bite you've had is probably gone for the next 15, 20 minutes either as well.
So obviously, how long do you wait and do you burley for them, and how long do you wait until you might move to a different whiting spot?
If I'm on a spot where I think I get fish on the tide and that part of the tide, I do wait it out. So I might be there for 10, 15 minutes and not get a bite. And I'm looking at the tide and what the tide's doing to think it's not quite there, but they're coming. And majority of the time they come. But in the same respect to that, I've had like trips where I've got no fish. So you might see all these fish and like we catch fish and stuff like that, but there's trips where we go and catch nothing. So, and that's down to probably maybe we should have moved and you don't. So if I was trying to target whiting for the whole day, I'd probably move after 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes if I hadn't got a bite, or I'd start burling, as in not burley straight away to see if I've got a bite. And once I've got the fish going, maybe pull the burley pot up to a degree. And if they slow down, maybe drop the pot back. So,
yeah, because the toads and the pingies can be like absolute hordes of death on burley. Obviously, I suppose one of my recommendations would be don't put burley down until you've maybe caught fish to keep them there and they slow up a bit. But certainly something that I've learned with Ben the Whiting Baron, who's our producer this evening. Don't put burley down unless you absolutely need to, because those little toadies in Westernport can really mess up your session.
Normally too with the toadies, that's when the tide slows down too, as into towards the end of them tides. So
go find some tide, you reckon?
Yeah, that's it. Normally there's no tide, there's not a lot of fish, and on them like change of tides and stuff like that, you can fish a lot deeper water for whiting, even down that western entrance and going into 20, 24 metres of water. So
cool. And just to remind everyone, if you're asking us some questions, you've got free time to ask online right now of Justin. And I'm just going to bring Anthony back into the mix because we've got both Westernport fishermen who can ask questions of Justin, and we've also got Port Phillip Bay fishermen more like myself and Anthony. So we might bring Anthony back into the mix here. Anth, you've been fishing Port Phillip Bay for how many years?
Many. I started fishing when I was about 6, so it's going to be quite a few years.
30 plus, mate.
34 years, yeah.
Righto. So tell us, Anth, so similar sort of questions for you, like Justin. What sort of conditions and tide or wind are you looking for fishing in Port Phillip Bay, mate?
Ideally, wind with tide, for sure. That would be my number one thing. If it's wind against tide, you just have to look at the conditions on the day, either bridle, sea anchor, or if you're lucky, you can use the motor to swing it around if it's not too bad a wind. Okay.
Tell us a little bit about depths and areas. You're obviously down on the Geelong sort of peninsula down there. What sort of depths and areas do you like fishing for whiting?
4 to 6 metres generally sees me out. I fish anywhere from Clifton Springs through to Queenscliff. The majority of my fishing is Queenscliff, St Leonard's area now. But while looking for tide, I have been known to venture out to that 8 metre mark.
Yep, cool. So tell us about your weapon of choice. Rod, reel, rig, line, hook, everything.
Everything. I was using a couple of Shimano rods. I've just moved over to a couple of the Atomics to give them a go. I've got one of the 2,500 reels from Shimano at the moment. I think they're loaded with about 12-pound braid. They'll go down to Paternoster rig. Probably around 12, 15 pound, depending on where I'm fishing, and generally a size 6 hook.
Cool. And do you have any preference to the hook type?
I've been using the worm hooks from Gammers, although I'm about to start trying some of the BBK whiting hooks.
Yeah, I've got some of those there. So just to let everyone know, behind the scenes of Just Your Average Fishos, before we write a bit of a tips article, we tend to do quite a bit of research, so fishing trips. And again, I'd just like to thank Ben behind the scenes here, because I didn't give whiting fishing any time of day whatsoever. And Ben was a member in our club that he could seriously go into, professional whiting fillet fabrication. I tell you, he's just he's a very high knowledge and a wonderful guy. I said, could you teach me a little bit about it so I could find it more enjoyable? And I said, let's mix it up a little bit. And I think I put up a bit of a report that I was using circles one day. He was using worm hooks, and he fishes for whiting quite a lot and was getting plagued by the toads when the tide would slow down, and they'd eat those small gamma size 6 worm hooks. So we're giving these BKK red Carlisle bloodworm hooks a crack. And so far, Ben reports that they're doing really, really well and lasting multiple sessions. And they're also really great value. So we love our Gamakatsus. Good evening, Jerry. And we're going to continue to use those for fishing for eternity for all different sorts of species. But absolutely, the BKKs are doing really well as well. So, Anth, any particular bait? What sort of bait do you like for port fillet baits? I know that certainly mussel and squid, or pippy and squid for Westernport, in my mind, is an absolute essential, but not so essential for port fillet. What's your thoughts?
So my first go-to is squid. I always have pippy on the boat. In saying that, when the fish have been really quiet, a little bit of pilchard fillet has been a winner this year for me.
Okay, pilchard fillet. Humble pilly always takes massive snapper. Can also take some big whiting. Hey, that's fantastic. Thanks for the information. And just as I was saying before, don't forget you've got this opportunity to ask questions via the live stream. And we're going to, thanks to Complete Angler Ringwood, which is my local tackle shop. And I know we say we're not sponsored. We're not sponsored by them, but they did want to support our show tonight and said, hey, can we put up a whiting essentials pack for, say, someone that asked the best question, which will be judged by our producer behind the scenes. I think he's got a picture of that up on screen now. Yes, he does. So it's a number of pre-tied rigs, some of those BKK hooks, swivels, leader line, fluoro tube sinkers, and some of those aniseed pellets. Talking about aniseed pellets, Anth, what's your thoughts on burley in Port Phillip Bay? Because I know that when you and I fish for whiting in summer and we put the burley pot down, about 15 billion pinkies come to say hi. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, this year's been really interesting with burleying. When the fish have been red hot, we haven't had burley at all. When they do slow down, though, putting the burley pot down has just resulted in just plagues of pinkies, unfortunately, and leather jackets. So
if you get decent leather jackets, though, they're really good for a feed. And I suppose it's really good health-wise for the bay to see so many pinkies in the bay. And I think I put up a live feed one night when I was just tuning sounders and showing people what different stuff like lice and pinkies look like on the sounder one night in Port Phillip Bay. There was one swarm of them that would have gone for 150 metres and been 20, 30 metres wide. Good sign, but bloody annoying. I grant you that. So maybe don't burley in Port Phillip unless you're trying to keep fish at the boat too.
Yeah, it's definitely a good sign for the bay ahead. But this year especially, if I've got onto the fish, I've limited my burley to very, very minimal. Only if the fish slowed down, and if they did slow down and the pinkies came round, I pulled it straight out of the water and just persisted.
What's your thoughts on the old humble banjo getting you in Port Phillip Bay while you're whiting fishing and putting down the burley? Have you had much attack from baby banjos whilst whiting fishing in Port Phillip Bay?
Yeah, look, there's always a few of those guys floating around. They're good fun on whiting gear when they get a bit bigger. We did get a small gummy of about 3.5-ish kilo this year fishing Queenscliff on the whiting. So yeah, they're always good fun.
Certainly, one of the things that you did at the start of snapper season this year, and Wayne Blake is quite famous for this, that when whiting fishing, you caught an absolute whopper of a snapper. Actually, people thought that we'd photoshopped the book in the gob of the snapper when you were showing it on the Just Your Average Fishos report. What size was that snapper on whiting gear, and how the hell did you get it in?
Yeah, that fish went just a fraction over 7 kilo. It was literally on a size 6 gamma worm hook, and it was just hooked through the front lip. I think it took me about 25 odd minutes to bring him in.
So there you go. It just shows that early snapper season fishing for whiting, you can definitely attract a horse of a snapper in. So well done. I was so pleased for you that day getting that fish, because that's like once a lifetime fish, you know, out of Port Phillip Bay on occasion anyway, but particularly while whiting fishing on your new whiting setup that very first weekend, mammoth effort. All right. So if someone wants to ask one of those best whiting questions to our panelists, now's the time, and our producer will pick a prize. Now, we've also got a bit of a general question, which our producers put up. When do we think that we're going to be back on the water? All right. I was going to say, should we have a pizza bet on this? I think it's going to be, we will be back on the water. You know, how long's a piece of string? Or 2 times half the length of a piece of string. One thing that I do know, as a father who is about to start homeschooling his kids, and I love my kids, but I'm not looking forward to it, with schools other than for essential workers being closed until the end of next term, which is what, the June, July school holidays. Sorry everyone, this is my personal opinion. I can't see a relaxing in stage 3 restrictions until then. Certainly, there's not. I don't. You know, I'm lucky enough that my wife's in the medical sort of world, and she sees a little bit more data than what the average Joe would. There is no real conclusive evidence to say that once you've had corona, that it doesn't come back. There's some reports out of China that it's coming back, and you don't really know what China data is anyway. So, you know, look, I'm no medico. I don't know the stats, but yeah, I'd be thinking that we might be lucky for that mid-winter sort of fish, which means you're going to need to get your boats ready to sit dry for another 3 months. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, when the kids go back to school, I think that's when we might be allowed to go fishing. So until then, until it's actually back and running, there'll be no fishing. So yeah, as much as we don't like it, yeah, we just don't go.
Okay, Anth, you're much the same.
Yeah, look, I suppose I'm in the same boat as everyone else. The sooner the better, but obviously we've got to do as we're told by the government at the moment, and that's no fishing. But look, I'd be happy just to walk along a pier and flick a placky at this point in time, but that's not in the no-go zone as well. Yeah, look, I'd like to hope that the next month or two we'll see some relaxing, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens with cases.
There needs to be a bit of common sense put in place, obviously through our governments, to like what is open now to obviously as an essential service. So you got a tackle shop that's open, for example. Like I think I saw a video this afternoon of a guy getting booked for washing his car. So I know they were down at Hastings on the weekend down at the tip and finding people going to the tip. So I'm thinking, why are these essential services open and getting fined, but people can't go there? So
yeah, look, I think it's all a bit convoluted, and I'm no lawmaker, so I'm not prepared to enter the debate. And we're sort of venturing into a subject. Thanks for the person who asked that question, but we're venturing into a subject that
I don't want to go there.
It's been covered time immemorial, and I suppose just you know, look, it would be reminisce on a live stream, and particularly a family-friendly page like Just Your Average Fishos, to not heed the safety warning. Justin, it touched you a little bit because you obviously knew those blokes who are missing at sea at the moment, and you know, God only knows what's happened to them, and that probably didn't help the cause either. But no one should pay the ultimate sacrifice for stupidity. But unfortunately, those guys in Westernport, pretty sad arrangement.
Yeah, not good.
Yeah. Let's move on from that. Look, we've got a number of questions to be asked the panel. All right, so what are Anthony and Justin's preferred whiting rigs and leader lengths? Blythe, we'll ask for you first because they might differ for Westernport.
Yep, so leader length probably about 1 metre. Obviously a running sinker rig. Fluorocarbon, anywhere from probably a 10 to 15. I use 12. hooks, obviously the C10U gammers, use red tube and just a bead on the end. So
tell us, why do you like the running rig rather than a paternoster? I've always fished paternoster for whiting, for what whiting fishing I have done. Why running rig for you?
So running rig, when I'm there, and obviously I'm whiting fishing and there's some tide, I'm actually moving or teabagging that bait. So I'm popping that sinker on and off the bottom. So that bait's sitting in the tide doing this. So every time I move it, and especially with a squid strip on there, it's actually moving in the water. So yeah, it does give a better reaction to a bite. So
okay, and what about you, mate, for Port Phillip Bay?
Basically, more tide, the more tide, the longer the lead up. So Queenscliff, I'd run 3/4 of a metre roughly, maybe a fraction more. The further I move around to Clifton Springs, where there's minimal tide, I'll run maybe 6-inch leader on a paternoster.
Okay, cool. All right, to both of you, sunrise or sunset as a preference? Well, sunrise I do like. I do like that early morning bite, and obviously being out there before that sun comes up, and if you do get the whiting going before that sunrise, it normally is a really good bite. Bigger fish I find on that sunset and going into early evening. Okay, Anth?
Yeah, I agree. Double-edged sword. Early morning, easier. You get up, boat's done. By the time the afternoon comes, you can sit back and relax. But by all means, bigger fish definitely in the afternoon if you're prepared to do it.
Yeah, it's fun coming home at 10:30, 11, and then cleaning whiting in the boat. So
yeah,
I don't tend to like that one.
Okay, so another question. When you fish for whiting, do you just target them only, or do you try for other fish at the same time? I suppose, Justin, in Westernport, there's always been that idea to have a big bait and a big rod hanging over the side, because Westernport, you can tend to, big mulloway, gummy shark, school shark, anything that's coming to feed into that whiting zone. What's your thoughts on that?
I used to take big rods out whiting fishing, and when I did get that bite on that bigger rod, it wrecked my whiting fishing. So, the whiting were gone after you got that bigger bite. And when you're pulling an eagle rail or a banjo or something like that, and it's just wrecked your belly trail, wrecked your whiting rods and everything like that. Yeah, so I tend not to put a big bait or
right,
big.
So go fishing for whiting and just whiting. What about you, Anth? Do you throw out a big bait in Port Phillip?
No, just if I'm chasing whiting, I am basically chasing just whiting. If I'm waiting for the tide to change, I'll have a squid jig out for some fresh squid. But if some nice sized flathead come along while I'm whiting fishing, then I'll happily take them too.
Sure, okay. To both of you, and I'll start off with you, Anth, is it worth the time to pump bass yabbies for whiting fishing?
Never used them myself.
Okay. Justin?
I've pumped yabbies before and stuff like that, and I have got some good fish on bass yabbies. We had some out the other night, and I think we caught 2 fish on the bass yabbies, and we bagged that night, and 2 fish on bass yabbies. I don't think it was worth the pumping and the effort to go get them. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. Another question to you both. Preference to fishing for whiting just at night, and do you think keeping the bait moving as such, like a slow retrieve is, or just fishing them in an actual rod holder in the deep? So first part of that question is fishing at night. Do you have night for preference for day? Justin?
Yeah, whiting of a night time, yeah. Early evening into night, yeah.
Okay.
Deeper water, I think with that deeper water, your bait's going to be moving to a degree anyway, just from the tide in Westernport. So, yeah.
So, and the second part of that question for you, Justin, so you reckon hold on to that rod all the time, not put the rod in the rod holder?
If I'm fishing deeper water, it is a little bit harder to feel the bite. So it might be a bigger bait. It might be a whole tentacle or something like that, where I'm not going to get stripped easy enough in that deeper water.
Okay. So more suitable to be in the rod holder in the deeper water?
Yeah. I probably wouldn't hold it. And I'm only doing a tide change if I'm doing that deeper water.
Okay. Ant, so first part of the question, night or day for whiting in Port Phillip Bay, and rod in the rod holder or holding?
I prefer during the day rather than night. If I'm waiting for fish, yeah, I'll have a couple of rods in the rod holder. I might miss the first couple of fish, but as soon as I know there's fish there, definitely rod in hand.
Yep, cool. All right, and do you think that keeping the bait moving, such as a slow retrieve, is more important then? So keeping in the, obviously you're saying keeping in the hand, but actually, as Justin referred to this miraculous sort of move of teabagging just before, so bottom bouncing, whatever you want to do. What do you reckon? What do you reckon, Ed?
Yeah, look, if the fish are on the bite, then generally cast out, let it hit the bottom, and away you go. But if they do slow down, a slow retrieve is certainly going to help entice the fish to a bait that looks like it's moving.
Yep, cool. All right, another good question, which sort of fits this one. Multiple rods or just one rod in hand? Because I know that, if we refer to some of the really well-known fishing guides and Juzzy, you're coming up and being one, and you think of Chris Casser and Graham Blake, they're just one Aaron Hapgood, just one rod guys. What are your thoughts on running multiple rigs? I've seen some YouTube Fish TV videos, Brendan Wing and mates, just have the old style whiting rods, basic reels, mono in Westernport, and have like 6 rods out and smash them. What are your thoughts? Multiple or one? I'll start with you, Anth.
If the fish are on the bite, definitely a single rod. If the fish are slow, I've been known to run a circle in close and have that in the rod holder, and then fish with one rod in hand.
Cool. Juzzy?
Yeah, one rod. I'm normally holding the rod when I'm whiting fishing, but if I am to run a second rod, it's a circle hook. So
cool.
A circle hook and bigger bait.
Yeah, circle hook and bigger bait. Yeah, I like the circle too. It's interesting. Ben and I went out for a fish in Westernport. He showed me how he did his thing, and I was fishing with a size 6 Gamma circle, and we were sort of fish for fish most of the morning. And then when they became a bit more timid throughout the day, I think that he certainly started to pants me at that stage, and was probably a little frustrated that he wasn't in the morning. So he stepped up the game, went the worm hook, and was striking at the fish where you sort of got to prevent yourself from striking with a circle hook. And that was probably where I was missing a few fish, because I was striking with the circle where you just got to let them come back and nab the bait. And the problem with the size 6 circle is, and probably also Juzzy, like a C10U, is that they're so small that you can't get huge hook penetration on a decent cocktail bait, where with a worm or a decent long shank, you can get some really decent hook penetration and a decent amount of bait on the hook, so it doesn't necessarily disappear the first sort of whiting time that you feel it, the fish hit the bait. Would that be fair enough to say, Juzzy?
Yeah, correct. One other thing, I was going to say, back on the burley, I know it's going back a bit, but with that burley in Westernport, with that tide going, a lot of them trap fish, what you want to call them, are virtually at the back of your boat. So when I do burley, I do cast a fair way out the back of the boat. So I'm not casting to that burley, I'm casting where that burley is going. So you find a long way out the back of the boat, you will get the whiting, and the fish you don't want to, obviously in that burley trail pretty close to the boat. So yeah, I just thought I might mention that.
That's a good point, Juzzy. And while you're just talking about burley, what is your preferred burley if you're going to resort to using some?
Yeah, so just the NSC pellets. So for baits, do a good one with the other NSC pellets.
Got some of these to give away, obviously.
Yep. A little bit of tuna oil and just a couple of pillies chopped up. That's it.
Yeah, it's funny. We had a person in Complete Angler Ringwood once who said they were going to go fishing for some whiting, hadn't done a lot of it. And Lofty said, follow my secret mix, which is now becoming very public, which was the seafood bait, aniseed pellets, a little splash of oil and some pillies chopped up. And that lovely young lady came back in and showed us some wonderful photos saying just how they'd absolutely brained it on the whiting. We're able to keep them at the boat with that mix. Anth, what about yourself, mate, for burley?
Just straight pillies in a cage.
Cool. All right. Got another question. Old mate Lockie from Lockie Fishing Adventures. You're an absolute champion. Lives around the corner. Follow his page. Finding a good whiting area. So, Anth, just for if one of the things we like to teach on the Just Your Average Fishos page is technique. We're not a site that gives out marks, because if you can learn technique, learn the handling of your boat and handling of your fishing species and prep, and you can go do it yourself, then you become a lot more confident, and you become a more accomplished fisho in your own right. And boy, does it feel a lot better. I know that when you and I have gone out and just thought, hey, let's go find some new gummy grounds, and we've been able to put up a great report on a new gummy ground, there's nothing that feels better. So if you're finding that your areas that you like, particularly in Port Phillip Bay, are becoming quite well known, how would you go out and find and sound new whiting ground, Ann?
If I'm going to go scout for whiting ground, I'll generally do it when the water's really clear and a nice sunny day if I can. Weed beds, find the sand holes, mark them in the sounder. That's by far. If you can see the sand hole, even better.
Yep. Okay. And Juzzy, how about yourself, mate? So, this has all come, you're a very accomplished fisho, but like you said, you had some major back surgery, you're lying in bed. The doctor said that you've got to get you moving again. You took up fishing. So a lot of this you've had to find. How would you, you've jumped in a boat and you've gone, okay, crap, I've got to go find some area to fish. How did you go about it?
Oh, like obviously with whiting and stuff like that. I have had a lot of help with people I've fished with before, and then obviously finding grounds myself. A lot of the research I'd done when I was on my back and stuff like that was Google Earth. So Google Earth cross-referencing with Navonics and finding weed patches, finding sand holes, then going to fish the area, then obviously fishing it on a tide where it produced. So they might not produce on an outgoing, and then when you fished it on an incoming, guess what? You smash them. So, more so, if I'm looking for whiting ground, I'm still looking for a drop-off as such, a hump in the middle of nowhere.
Okay. Yeah. So, sort of bringing the show a little bit to a close and the whiting discussion to a close, because we thought we'd be on air for an hour, and we hope that the information has been well received tonight, and would certainly love your feedback. Give us the 1, 2, 3, Juzzy, of fishing in Westernport Bay. And I know you said this before, plan your trips, but if you said 3 things that you absolutely would not compromise on to go, whiting fishing, what is it?
Three things. One's wind and tide, which is probably wind and tide's my main one. Make sure you've got wind and tide. It's not that it's unpleasant, like it is unpleasant doing it when it's not, but to get the fish, wind with tide's preferred every day of the week. It doesn't matter if you're whiting fishing, gummy fishing, whatever. Your baits sit better, it's more comfortable, and everything's fine the same way. 2 would be bait presentation. Fresh baits. If I'm going whiting fishing, I'm trying to fish that curve of the tide to get a squid before I go whiting fishing. So I have got fresh baits. And the last one is probably your depth. So knowing your depth, what you're fishing in between, obviously a high tide to a low tide, and making sure you sort of stick to your rule when you're out there fishing and following that bank if you are going to move. And sometimes the plans don't always work, but obviously you learn from them and then don't do it again next time.
Okay, Anth, tell us a little bit about your 3 absolutely non-compromises when Anth is going whiting fishing in Port Phillip Bay.
Ideally, it would be wind with tide. Secondly, I would like to fish the biggest tide of the day and dirty water.
Dirty water. Okay. That's actually a really interesting one. I'm glad you brought that up, Anth, because a lot of people say for both Westernport and Port Phillip Bay that dirty water really does help. So you think dirty water outfishes clear water in Port Phillip Bay as a preference?
I'm gonna argue with this one with myself. St Leonard's, Queenscliff, dirty water, hands down. Some of the biggest days we've had at Clifton Springs we've done where you can literally see the bottom and see the fish swimming around.
Okay. And Juzzy, what about water clarity for you, mate?
Yeah, well, it's normally pretty dirty over in Westernport anyway, but like down middle spit, you do get clearer sort of water on the last of that incoming tide to the start of the outgoing tide before the tide gets moving. So it does clean up in between tides. But then once that tide starts to flow, you do get that dirty water again. So, yeah, I'd say dirty water for the whiting.
Okay. Question to both of you, or to maybe Juzzy. If you fish Point Leo area, what depth are you looking to go to?
Yeah, so it wouldn't matter if it was gummies or whiting. It's the same sort of depth that I'm fishing for the gummies and whiting. I'm looking around about that 8 metres to 6 metres.
Okay, so quite deep for whiting. So normally whiting for fishermen in Port Phillip Bay would be 2 to 5. I think so.
That's off our point, Leo. If I was fishing, say, down towards Summers, Balnarring, and that sort of depth, I'm fishing probably 3 metres.
All right, so a bit of a brag board. Anth, Port Phillip Bay, biggest whiting in what area?
Queenscliff this year is 47 centimetres.
Oh, that's a monster for Port Phillip Bay. Juzzy, biggest whiting, what area?
It was buoy 14 in about 24 metres, and it was 52 centimetres.
Yeah, righto, you win.
No, but
what a cracker.
Yeah. So, but yeah, some good boarding.
Great gummy spot, buoy 14, pretty well known.
Yeah.
Certainly has done. That was where I overcaught my first double with my brother-in-law, Mark, many, many years ago on our boat on a guide with Quayne Blake. So a very, very good area. Really interesting sand pockets behind there. So if you're a Westernport fisherman and you've got a slower tide, that's a good area for a gummy. But we're talking whiting. Now, one question that I had, which hasn't been asked, but you have this problem in both bays, the notorious weed. So you might be fishing the slower tide after a large tide, which has disrupted the weed. How do you guys combat the weed? So let's say you've gone out and your plans have been foiled by bloody weed. What do you do? What are you trying to look for more tide or changing up your depth? Like, what do you do? Because weed can be a real sucker to particularly fishermen that don't know how to handle it. It can really bugger your lines up. What do you do? I'll start with you, Anth.
Yeah, it's definitely an issue. St Leonard, Swan Bay areas. I'll generally pack up and move. Probably deeper water is my go-to, or at least get away from the weed and then work to the new requirements that you've been dealt with.
Okay, Juzzy?
Yeah, weed was sometimes I just try persevere with that weed. Otherwise, I might be moving the boat maybe, 15, 20 metres in or 15, 20 metres wider. And either looking out for a deeper spot or looking up for a shallower spot. But I tend, when I go shallower, I tend to lose some of that tide.
Yep. All right. Question, and probably more for Anthony. Is it an all year round whiting fishery? Actually, it's to both of you. Is both bays an all year round whiting fishery? So it's whiting caught all year round. Anth, start with you.
It's proving to be becoming a longer season now. Well, it appears to be becoming a longer season. Whether it's all year, the fish are always in the bay. It's just a matter of how hard you're prepared to look for them.
Okay. So in winter, in the depths of winter, would you say that's the slowest period for whiting, or what's the slowest period in Port Phillip Bay, mate?
Yeah, coming up to winter, it's probably not slower. There's just less people fishing for them, so you just don't hear the reports.
Okay. And Justin, what about yourself, mate? The all year round fishery in Westernport Bay?
Yeah, they are. I don't try fish for them all year round. When it gets to winter, I sort of target, obviously, gummies and stuff like that over that winter sort of period. But they are all year round in Westernport. And probably depths is the main issue with the whiting, as in compared to summer to winter. And obviously over winter, you're looking for a shallower sort of area, say overnight time compared to winter, just for that warmer sort of water.
Okay, cool. No worries. All right, so I suppose with the nod of Ben, our producer, in the background, I think that probably sums up a lot of the whiting chat, and I really thank everyone who's looked at our new live stream show online and asked many fantastic questions. We've got to draw a prize of a complete angler ringwood. Oh, hang on. No, we're good. Hang on, we had a question. Oh, coming up. All right. So the question, Ben Whitelaw, giving away a whiting pack to the value of $140 from Complete Angler Ringwood. If you message the Just Your Average Fishos page, I will personally COVID-free express freight that to you, and you can tie some rigs. Look at all those rigs and all the bits and pieces you get there. You can tie some rigs, get your whiting rods ready for when we do come back online. So before we nick off for this evening, congratulations and thanks, Ben, for the question and supporting the Just Your Average Fishos live streaming show. Obviously, this will get better with your recommendations. I'd really like to come back and do something that's close to my heart, which is gummy fishing. And I think that's what we'll do the next show about, but take your advice. Would also like your comments on how we can improve this experience for you through the lockdown period. It's a way that we can all come together as a bunch of fishos and talk fishing. And I really hope that if you've learnt one thing tonight, then this show, which is all free, non-sponsored and unbiased, has been good information for you. Before we also go, we'd like to also thank a number of supporters of our page in general who have helped us with a lot of information and some of the best fishing guides around. So one, certainly for Westernport Bay and for snapper, whiting and gummy shark fishing is both Justin Blythe, obviously, with your fishing guides, mate, but also Fruits, Sean Faturi, or Furniture, sorry, mate, if I've said your name wrong, from Think Big Charters. You're an absolute wonderful supporter of the Mitcham Angling Fishing Club and the Just Your Average Fishos page. And may I wish you very well at the moment. And may all your guides have many, many fish on that Think Big boat. You've done an excellent job over in Westernport. And obviously over in Port Phillip Bay, one of the guys that I had the pleasure of meeting with Anth not so long ago is Chriso from Gone Fishing Charters. What an absolute gentleman, and what an amazing couple of boats that he has. And we need to support these guys. So if you are someone that is looking for more techniques, going on a fishing guide or on a fishing charter and even paying the extra money to personalise it for yourself is a great way to get an unlimited source of information from people that do this for their bread and butter living. So I couldn't more highly recommend it. Obviously, Just Your Average Fishos was formed because not everyone can afford to do that. I've spent thousands of dollars going on guides with lots of wonderful people, asking lots of questions and learning what I can. And, you know, it's not necessarily that we're rehashing everything here and all the marks here. Not everyone can afford to do that. And that's what Just Your Average Fishos is all about. So again, thank you to everyone who supported the Just Your Average Fishos community. Thanks to everyone who's following us. Like and share, give us your comments behind the scenes. Ben, we're going to send you a fantastic whiting pack, compliments of Complete Angler Ringwood. Thank you to Jerry from Froggies Offshore, who's helping us out with a few bits and pieces behind the scenes for the next show as well. Justin, thank you very much for joining us, mate, and telling us your Westernport knowledge. Anthony, your mechanical knowledge. There's a few things that I need to focus on looking after the boat while we're in this lockdown period. May everyone be safe and the lockdown period be short. And of course, the final thank you and a massive thank you. We couldn't do this without him. Ben Shannon, aka the Whiting Baron, the Just Your Average Fisho man, silently behind the scenes from his business, We Are Technical. If you have a business, be it small, large, medium, that needs to get your staff together, get conferences together with your colleagues and customers, We Are Technical is the place to see. He's using very unique features of this Zoom platform, which allows you to conference in a professional manner as if everyone was there. So thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining us. Until the next show, Just Your Average Fishos, over and out. Have a great night.